Hey guys, Pastor Ben here with another review and reflection. I am really excited today to talk to you about a fantastic little book that I finished reading the other week. It's called The Art of Disagreeing: How to Keep Calm and Stay Friends in Hard Conversations. And it's written by Gavin Ortlund. This is actually his newest book, came out just a couple months ago here in the beginning of 2025. It is very short, and so I'll try to keep this review fairly short as well, but as a pastor, I am so thrilled to see this book. It's very helpful for me, and I think it'll be helpful for many other folks as well. So let me go ahead and walk through what he's trying to do in this book, how he kind of structures his project, and then I'll share some thoughts about how this might be useful and how to use this book in a helpful way. So the book is all about disagreements, and it's written to be short and digestible enough that if you are maybe preparing for a hard conversation, that you could actually get your hands on this book and read it before that conversation and have it kind of help guide you through it. Because as Gavin Ortlund talks about, we are living in an age that seems particularly divided. I mean, every generation, every age has disputes and disagreements. And especially as Christians, one of the things that we have to navigate is hard conversations, confronting sin, dealing with those who have been hurt by or sinned against by others. And knowing how to do that with wisdom is really challenging. And so this is a book that's written by a faithful pastor to try to help guide folks through how do you think about disagreement in general, and how do you navigate that in a way that's Christ-honoring and that is productive and fruitful. And I think one of the first things that he does is not only to talk about why disagreement is so difficult, but to also kind of reframe that to help us see that through the lens of the gospel, disagreements can also be a place of productivity. And he sort of casts this vision, what if disagreement with someone was not automatically a scary thing that meant the relationship was going to break down or be challenged or something like that, but what if we learned how to engage with our disagreements in such a way that they could actually be productive, that they could actually be beautiful, that we could learn how to listen better and persuade well and pursue the truth together, but also how to live with disagreements in such a way that they wouldn't harm the more fundamental unity that we have in Christ, if it's a disagreement between two believers, or in such a way that it doesn't undermine our common humanity as those who are made in the image of God, no matter who is involved with the dispute. And so I really love the kind of clear-eyed pastoral vision that he casts, where he realizes there is a lot of disagreement now, and disagreements are hard and scary for different people for different reasons, but in light of the gospel, they can become something different. And that's really the kind of burden of the book, is to try to help us think through what's going on when we're disagreeing with someone, what are some of the temptations that we're going to face, and then how can we respond to those temptations in a wise way. One of the pictures that he uses, that he introduces early on, is sort of an example from social psychology of how people tend to respond to the prospect of disagreements. And you'll probably recognize yourself in this. So the picture that's sometimes used is that you can kind of divide the population into roughly two halves, and sort of half of us tend to respond to disagreements as a rhinoceros. We charge ahead, we are aggressive. If we see a fight coming, we charge towards it, we want to engage. And then the other half tend to respond more like hedgehogs. The tendency there is to sort of withdraw, curl up, protect yourself, that type of thing. And everybody has some leaning or impulse. And I'm sure, this is a kind of general theory. There's probably exceptions to the rule. But that definitely resonates with me. I think both what I've seen in other people, and as I was sort of reading those examples, there were certain people I know that I thought, oh, yep, she's a rhinoceros, and oh, okay, yeah, she's a hedgehog, or, whatever. And I'm a hedgehog. If I look at my tendency, I don't love or relish debate, conflict, and so all of us have sort of tendencies. And he says, okay, depending on what your tendency is, you're also going to have certain temptations. If your tendency is to be a hedgehog and like pull away, then your tendency is going to be to not be as courageous as you ought to be, and to actually withdraw again from the possibility that disagreement done well can actually produce something good. And so you'll lose out on the chance to either persuade someone else of the truth, or perhaps to listen well and grow yourself. confrontation, disagreement is not always bad. In fact, it's a necessary and important part of life. We need that resistance. We need that iron sharpening iron, just as people. And then as Christians, God actually says he works through his word and through other Christians, faithful pastors and elders and things, to challenge us, to correct us, even to rebuke us, Paul says. So if we're only kind of slipping into that hedgehog mentality, we're going to lack the courage to engage with those disagreements and to disagree with other people when maybe they need something that we have to offer them. But of course, there's a temptation with the other side, and that is if you're a rhinoceros, you can tend to kind of get a thirst for blood, and you just love the conflict, you love the battle, you start looking for a fight everywhere. Or maybe even when you are not looking for a fight, but one kind of comes up, you're engaging with it, but not with an eye towards loving the other person or honoring God or showing kindness, and you can end up doing damage to the cause of truth. So even if you're in the right, you can act wrong if you're doing so in a sinful way. And so he's, again, just trying to kind of introduce that there are these different tendencies and each of them have their own challenges. And so he spends, the first part of the book is just an introduction called Why Disagreement is Difficult, and he kind of covers some of what I've talked about already. And then chapter 1 is all about kindness, and that's kind of speaking most particularly to the rhinoceroses out there. Now it applies to all of us, but it's especially helping those who maybe forget to be kind in disagreement to remember the importance of that and what that looks like and what it doesn't look like and all of that. Chapter 2 is all about courage. So there it's speaking more to the hedgehogs, people who might want to withdraw or kind of curl up from a conflict, and it reminds them of the importance of engaging in those things, again, in a right way. Then chapters 3 and 4 really kind of go together. They're speaking to everyone and saying, okay, in any disagreement, the art of disagreement, how to keep calm and stay friends in hard conversations, what are the two things you have to do? You've got to listen and you've got to talk. You've got to persuade. That's the nature of a disagreement, right? Two people have different views, so you need to listen to understand where they're coming from, and then you need to be able to speak and share your perspective and what you believe the truth to be, and be willing to engage with that. And so, having been informed by those kind of foundational principles and reminders of the importance of kindness and of courage, he then goes on to talk about listening. What does it look like to listen well? What should our motivation be? What are some techniques to know how to listen well, how to pay attention, what to do with what we hear, all those types of things. And then he gives a chapter to persuasion as well. How are people actually changed? And I think some people would be surprised to learn, there's been lots of studies on this, how do people change their mind about different things? Obviously, arguments and logic play a role. And as Christians, we believe that, truth is real, truth matters. And so what we believe should be founded upon the truth, upon reason in some important senses. And yet we are not merely computers. We're not just rational robots sort of making these deductions. People are persuaded either to agree or to disagree with you by a lot of things outside of just the syllogisms that you give them. The way that you engage, the way that you listen. Is there kindness? Is there courage? Is there... do they sense that you get where they're coming from and what they're concerned about? All of that is really important if you actually want to persuade people. And so he talks a lot about those things. And then he ends with a chapter on love. And he just sort of reminds us at the end that, especially as Christians, right, Jesus said, you will know them by their love. And I think a lot of people, unbelievers and believers, would have to say, well, I don't know that Christians are marked by their love. And that says a lot about us. But as God truly gets hold of our heart and his Spirit does that work of sanctification, that's what should grow more and more in our hearts, that there would be a right love for one another. Now, I appreciate the fact that Ortlund ends on that note, and that he's also very careful to define and unpack love in a biblical way. Love does not just mean, go along to get along, agree to disagree, it doesn't really matter, we're all right, this is your truth, this is my truth. No, he spent the whole book talking about the fact that disagreements are necessary, that they're even good, and that we need courage to engage in them, and that we need to be willing to listen, but it's also important to persuade and advocate for the truth. So he's not using love as a cop-out from engaging in hard conversations, or even challenging people when they're wrong, confronting what is wrong or confronting what is evil. But as we do that, we need to do it in a loving way, and with a heart of love that reflects the love that God himself is and has shown to us. So it's a wonderful, quick, but substantive guide to the art of disagreement. And I think it'll be helpful for a number of people. So, I picked this up because I love Gavin Ortlund. I follow his YouTube channel, and I just find him very helpful. And I find him helpful on kind of two fronts. So first off, there's a number of apologetic issues. That's kind of the space that he has stepped into over the last couple of years, dealing with apologetics and kind of interdenominational disputes and so forth. And I find his arguments often very clear, very helpful, very logical. He's very persuasive, so that's great from that standpoint. But almost more than that, what I've really come to appreciate from Dr. Ortlund's work, and what has really challenged and shaped me as a pastor and how I'm engaging with these things, is his spirit and his heart in that. So he's not sacrificing truth at all. He's very logical. He's very clear. He tries to make arguments. He's willing to disagree. He's willing to enter into these things. I mean, in many ways, his YouTube channel is, almost every video is entering into disagreement in some way, and yet he does it in such a Christ-like way. It's very disarming. It's very peaceable. It is truly irenic, which means aiming towards peace. It doesn't mean that you're avoiding all conflict, but it means that you're seeking to enter into that conflict in order to actually reach some unity, some agreement. And I have really been impressed by that. It's interesting, when I listen to Gavin Ortlund and read some of his books, he advocates for a number of views theologically that are different than my own, on creation and charismatic gifts and some of the sacraments and things like that. So I'm not in lockstep with him on every doctrinal issue, and yet I find him, even in those articles or videos or books, to be worth engaging with, because he does it in a very Christ-like way. And I think that's really what this book is trying to do, trying to help us learn, how do we engage in hard conversations? How do we step forward into areas of disagreement in a way that can ultimately be fruitful and ultimately give glory to God? And so I think, I read this as a pastor, not only because I like Gavin Ortlund, but because one of the kind of occupational hazards for my calling is hard conversations. I mean, every week it seems like there's a tough conversation to have with someone. Maybe it's confronting sin. Maybe it's challenging someone. Maybe it's hearing about how other people have been hurt or problems that they have, or trying to mediate disputes between different people. So pastors have to do a lot of this work of entering into tough situations, hard conversations. And you can't be a rhino who just runs over everybody. We've seen a lot of examples of pastors who have fallen into that sinful tendency, and it does great damage to the gospel. But the answer is not to become a hedgehog and just avoid conflict, avoid disputes, try to pretend like everything's fine. You have to be able to speak with courage and speak with kindness, to listen well, to persuade others, and to do so with a heart of love. And that's what this book is trying to lay out. But it's not just for pastors. I think, especially today, people are finding that there's disagreements everywhere you turn. Maybe it's about religion. Maybe it's about politics. Maybe it's about just, hey, should I get this job? Or, should we buy this car? I mean, it could be all sorts of things, everyday things, big things, religious things, non-religious things. There's room for disagreement in almost every sphere of life. Wherever you get two people together, there's going to be room for disagreement. So how do you navigate that? This is, hands down, the best book that I've found on this subject. It's very practical. It's very wise. It also does a very good job, just kind of throwing this in. You can tell he's been a pastor, because one of the things that he does is to also help kind of delineate different types of conversations and disagreements. So particularly in situations where there's abuse, sometimes people are engaging in a good faith way. There's a good faith disagreement, and you need to speak to that. Other times, though, it's not worth engaging, and I think we've all kind of seen this maybe online. There's some people who, maybe you present your view and they kind of are challenging your view, and you could have a really fruitful back and forth as you kind of talk about that, because they're open to listening and persuading, and you're open to listening and persuading. There's also just a lot of trolls out there who are just trying to disagree, who are going to hate everything you say, who are going to misrepresent it in whatever way possible. And so learning how to sift through those conversations, what's a conversation worth having, what's not a conversation worth having, is important. Knowing how to be kind and open towards people, and yet also to establish right boundaries or protections, especially in situations of abuse or grave sin in some way. So there are sticky, practical issues that pop up in this subject, and he does a good job of, he doesn't overly focus on that, but he'll just sort of give some good qualifiers so that if you're in that situation, he'll help guide you through that a little bit, which I just find very valuable. So it's a book that I would happily hand to everyone in my congregation. I fully expect to go through this probably as a Sunday school with my church, because I just think it'll be useful for folks. And I found it very helpful, and we'll probably be revisiting it as I have opportunity to have some of those hard conversations myself. So I would encourage everybody to get a copy and spend a little bit of time reading this wonderful book by Gavin Ortlund called The Art of Disagreeing: How to Keep Calm and Stay Friends in Hard Conversations.